Hey everybody, welcome to another welcome to another How to Succeed podcast here with Sandler. I have a very special guest this week. It is our bilingual sales trainer, Jorge Saunders, and I'm so excited to talk to him about how we use our How to Succeed principles or success principles in two languages. How do we sell in North America in Spanish? That's what we're talking about this week on the show. So if you're interested in that, stick around. We are also live, so you can join us on YouTube. You can LinkedIn, Facebook. Share comments for Jorge as well if you have any questions about selling in Spanish or selling to bilingual speakers and things. All great stuff. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast in your favorite app or wherever you are listening and watching to it now. This is How to Succeed at Selling in Spanish. All right, Jorge, welcome to the show. Tell me a little bit about our topic today here. You've obviously been selling in multiple languages and countries for a long time for us. What are we talking about today?
Well, I'm addressing this talk to the approximately 53 million people that speak Spanish in North America. And I'm pretty sure that most of them are bilingual. I can't imagine that if they are here. Well, I'm guessing they speak English. However, their mother language is Spanish. And I'm talking about how when we have a training, sales training, if we receive that information in our mother language, it makes sense. We may be bilingual. I may understand English. Of course, I go to I watch TV. I do a lot of things. My life is in English. However, when we learn something and we listen to that in our mother language, then the things make sense. That's what we're talking about today.
I love that. Now, obviously, we're doing it in English, so this is a little bit ironic and meta here, but I hope people will appreciate it and learn a little bit about Sandler and our international reach. I think it's actually something like 11 languages in 17 countries or something like that
That's
we do
correct.
sales training.
That's correct. Yes, yes. I actually talk about 12 languages, but very close to the 11. So yes.
Well, there you go. Maybe you added a different one because I know we have different versions
Yeah.
of Spanish too, in Mexico
Yes.
and Spain. So we'll count that twice. Tell me about the ideal attitude here for salespeople that are bilingual. Are there any common myths or misconceptions or best practices?
Well, in regards to attitude, the main thing about our attitude, one of our strongest foundations in our system is that we need to learn to separate our roles from our identity. And we in Latin America, we are not used to talk about this separation. Uh, I actually learned about this when I started working with a U.S. company more than 30 years ago. When my boss was telling me, Jorge, this is not personal, I didn't understand what he was talking about, and I was angry or sad or whatever. And when I learned about Sandler and the attitude thing, I understand finally that when we talk about attitude, is how we need to separate our roles, especially our sales role from our different roles, in order to avoid not to do things. And once again, I'm talking about you, Spanish speaking person that, again, in our countries, I'm talking about especially America Latina, Latin America, where our culture is not used to talk about this personal business. We mix all together, and we need to understand that as far as we understand and as far as we develop separating our sales role from our different roles, things are going to be different. We're going to perform better. We can receive better feedback and not to feel it like personal.
I think that's a good one. I mean, that's a great lesson for everybody, right? But I do feel like you're speaking to bilingual people and Latin people here, because there is an interesting kind of thing too, that I think sometimes even the language barrier. If you're selling in English and it's not your native language, sometimes you can take that personally, or the person on the other end can take it personally when there's a miscommunication, right?
That's correct.
And I think
Yes.
if you can separate that out and understand that the language difference is different than the problem you're trying to solve or your ability to help that person, it can really lower those anxieties and allow you to just kind of work on solving the problems instead.
Mhm. It even happens myself when I'm training people from all over Latin America that I need to let them know that I was born in Mexico. My accent is Mexican, even though it's Spanish, but we have different words here and there that I may say something that for someone in, I don't know, Ecuador or Costa Rica or Panama doesn't make sense. So I'm expressing that I need to separate that role, and we need to understand that it is not a personal thing. It's about something that we are, bringing from the past, and that makes it easier, especially when I'm doing training, sales training.
Yeah. Now you mentioned mixing business and pleasure and work a
Mhm.
little bit. I have
Mhm.
found that other cultures see that a little bit differently. I don't know if that's an American thing that we like to go to
Mhm.
work and then at 5 o'clock
Mhm.
we're off work or we're on at a networking event or something. But could you talk a little bit
Mhm.
more about an ideal attitude for building relationships and maybe what an appropriate approach would be to handling your business and personal life?
Yeah, well, certainly the Latin culture is way much more, let's say, happy. Let me put it that way. I'm not saying that you're
I'll
sad,
agree
but
with it. Yeah.
however, yes, it feels like we can mix more the business environment with the cultural thing, or I don't know, being late or things like that. That it's a perception about the Latin American culture. However, once again, when we really learn about this separation of roles, that makes us focus way much better. And at the end, we're trying to solve problems to the people. In our sales role, we are, uh, as professionals, there to solve problems. So if we actually achieve that separation, definitely our customers, our prospects, see a different sales guy in front of it, in front of her or her.
That's great. I agree with you. I think I'm a little envious of the work-life balance that seems to be a little bit
Mhm.
better in Latin cultures.
Mhm.
Um, but I could see where that could cross over, and maybe this takes us to behavior too. Are there things that you need to do differently if you're selling in a Latin culture or selling in the American culture
Mhm.
as a bilingual seller? Do you see any behaviors that are different? You kind of mentioned showing up on time or other things. Sometimes those are treated differently. Do you see anything else that way?
Well, in regards to behavior, a couple of things that that's my opinion. Uh, Certainly, we need to spend a little bit more time in bonding and rapport. Uh, I've been doing business in the USA for many years, and yes, you can jump into the business way much faster, and it doesn't feel like the people is gonna feel it rough or anything like that. And most in Latin American countries, you really need to spend a little bit more time in that regards, show a little bit more of interest in the person than it happens
Mhm.
here in the U.S. Again, you
That's
can,
nice.
for example, tell your upfront contract right away, and it's good here. Uh, Not necessarily is going to happen. It not necessarily is going to have the same result when you are dealing with Hispanic, the Latin American business person. So those are the little things that we need to tropicalizar. We say it in Spanish. We need to tropicalize, uh,
Mm.
to make the system work. Another thing related to behavior is that we are not used to accountability. Even the
Mm.
word accountability, it's hard on translation. However, the best translation for that word is rendición de cuentas. And the accountability down there is not like a systematic thing. Here, you can listen that word in the news for the political people everywhere, not to mention in the business environment, and that opens the door to talk about our cookbooks. Our cookbooks is a good source for accountability, and again, that's something that it can be implemented in the business environment, and that way you're going to be accountable to someone. I don't know, yourself, your wife, your boss, and whatever. But again, it is not a cultural topic that it's learned through the professional life. But
What
once you
about goal
implement it,
setting in general, and sales goals or personal goals or things like that?
well, I think uh, regular, if I may say,
Okay.
goal setting, personal setting. Uh, but again, I can have my goals written on black and white or whatever, but the fact that someone is going to, the fact that I'm going to be accountable for someone, that's the main big difference that I see between all our cultures. Mhm.
That's interesting. Any recommendations, either for Spanish speakers coming into an American company, maybe that does have sales managers holding them accountable, or if you just know that that's a weakness, maybe recommendations to hold yourself accountable.
Well, actually, that question links me to the attitude. We need to understand that if I'm going to be accountable, it's going to be my boss is going to be talking to me, Jorge, as a sales person, not as the person, not
Mm.
and if he tries to make me better, he or she is not uh, uh, talking to the wrong things I did as a person. He or she is talking to me as the things that I can improve as a salesperson, and that helps me to understand how I can separate my different roles in life.
I like that. Any other behaviors or actions or sales process things that are different, that you've come across?
I don't really see, again, in terms of setting goals or short-term goals, long-term, mid-term goals, company, etc. I don't see big differences other than actually the word recetario, cookbook. That's not a
Yeah.
common thing to use. I would say in
Uh,
everywhere.
I I love a good Spanish recipe, though, for sure. Okay, let's transition over to technique. So here you mentioned upfront contracts might come a little bit later. Are there any other techniques, tools, hacks, Sandler concepts that maybe need to be adjusted or highlighted in Spanish
Well,
selling?
technique related. That's where, as we started earlier this conversation, that's when I believe that if you learn the techniques in your mother language, it makes sense. I can understand them in English. In fact, the first time I learned about Sandler, it was in December 2007. It was in St. Louis, Missouri. Of course, it was in English. And I learned the technique. I learned about Sandler and I loved it. However, the things didn't make sense to me until, I developed them in my practice, in my sales practice. But once I listen several things, I'm not going to tell you everything, but once I listen several things in my own language, in Spanish, then things started to make sense. For example, negative reversing. You know,
Mhm.
that's not an easy thing to understand, to learn, even in your own language. So of course,
Mhm.
I understand the words, I understand the rules of that technique, but again, in order for me to make sense, it only happened until I listened them in my own language. It is like going to church. I go to
Mm.
church every Sunday, and I can go to church here in Miami and in an English mass, uh, and I may understand. But if I go to that same mass in Spanish, then it will make sense. It is like a phrase that says something like, "We uh, we listen to understand, not listen to reply," or something like that. Very similar.
Yeah, that's interesting. There are probably some Sandler buzzwords that don't quite translate. You mentioned negative reversing.
Mhm, mhm.
Is And I can think of like pattern interrupts or other things that might be interesting. Is there anything else, techniques that you think? And you mentioned cookbook and stuff too. Or any other
Yeah. Mhm.
techniques, buzzwords that you think need explanation?
Well, upfront contract. Uh, Upfront contract is, it can have a literal translation, contrato previo. However, in my opinion, contrato, it's like a very strong word, you know. So a more a translation that fits a little bit better, it could be acuerdo previo. Uh, so there are things throughout the whole 7 steps of our system that needs a little bit of adjustment in order for us to understand them better. Again, if we're bilingual, we may understand, but when we listen in the language that we were born, then that's when the things make sense. Another one, it could be, let me think very quickly, dummy curve. Dummy
Yeah,
curve, that's not a usual thing down there. Uh,
it's not a
so
usual thing in English either. It's kind of a tough one to explain. Yeah,
okay, then it needs to be explained with topics of in Spanish, and then that makes it better to understand. And of course, you may understand it, but if you don't really suck it, you're not going to apply it.
yeah.
Hopefully, I expressed myself properly with that.
Uh, I was going to ask you about the Sandler rules because I know we did translate all the Sandler rules
Mhm.
into Spanish, and you can get that book. I think also in audio book format. But do any Sandler rules jump out as challenging or especially powerful in Latin markets?
Well, for example, there's a rule that I actually remember that when I read it in English several years ago, I said, "What is this?" Uh, and and the thing is that I had to understand that in order for me to actually uh, execute it. And it was the rule that says that if you are in attack, please
If you're under
refresh my memory.
attack, fall back.
Fall
Yeah.
back. Yeah, that's tough to understand in English, and but once you understand it, fully understand it, so the translation makes more sense. Si te atacan, repliégate. So yes, there are rules that are, of course, everything is translated, definitely. However, not everything is directly translated. It has to be
Yeah.
with a little bit of twist in order to make sense.
Now, you're one of our international trainers and have been for a long time, like you mentioned, about 15 years or
Mhm.
so.
Mhm.
So I wanted to ask you to zoom out a little bit. And when you think about rollouts of global sales training, when you have maybe some sellers that are selling in English, some are selling in
Mhm.
Spanish, or things. What have you learned about these rollouts as teams? If we were talking to maybe an international company or a training director that has people in multiple languages, what are some of your top takeaways and lessons learned over the last 15 years?
Yeah, well, at the end, when we are training a company with Sandler, we are establishing a sales common language. So it definitely works. So the company can speak the same sales language all over the place. I have had the opportunity to uh, to do training exactly at the same time that another another Sandler coach is doing the training, actually in the same place, and that one is doing the training in English, and I'm doing the training in Spanish. And well, my experience has been great. Uh, but again, if the training is being delivered in the language of the mother language of the person, then the team will actually establish the common sense language. Not only that, but also several people that are bilingual. They were trained in English for the first time. I don't know. Let's talk about. Uh, he was trained in English. He was a guy from Mexico City or whatever, and then he took the same training in Spanish. Uh, Usually, the word is "Wow! Now I understand. Now I fully understand." Uh, Now, the thing is to understand the methodology, understand the system, and then you can apply it in whatever language you want. But once you understand it, then you can uh, execute in any language.
I love that. I'm going to need you to execute on these next two comments from Peter here because he's commenting in Spanish. So, which Sandler rule is this? And can you give us a couple of talking points on it?
Vive una vida recta en un mundo torcido y te van a matar. Well, the translation would be something like you need to live. If you live straight life in a torch world, then you're going to be killed.
Oh, that's the if you live straight in an unstraight world,
That's a,
you're going to
that
get killed.
that's right.
That one's old school there, Peter. I like that. What about this one here?
No puedes llegar a la segunda base con un pie pegado. You can reach second base with a step stick on first base.
Yeah, you can't get to second place
Mhm.
or second base with 1 foot on first. That's a great one about cuts. All right, Peter, I appreciate you chiming in there. But let's wrap this up here, Jorge. I wanted to get to know you a little bit better before we end the show.
Sure.
So tell us, after 15 years of Sandler, how do you define success with all these principles and philosophies?
Well, success is if you have a defined goal and you are pursuing that goal every single day and you love it, then that's success. I'm a mechanical electrical engineer by profession. However, I am a sales guy by decision. Since I graduated in 1989, I have been in sales because I love it. And I learned, just like I said, about Sandler in December 2007, and I decided to start my Sandler business in August 2008. So in August 2023, I will be 15 years with Sandler, and I have been a partner in 6 different franchises throughout my career with Sandler.
That is awesome. What was the biggest lesson learned or hurdle you had to get over in order to be successful? Do you have a failure you're most proud of, or a lesson that was really hard for you to execute?
Well, I need an hour to talk about that, but my favorite Sandler rule is there is no bad prospects, only bad salespeople. That's my favorite Sandler rule, and my biggest lesson learned is that I need to look at myself.
Yeah, I love that one. That one's a tough one. Tough one to get for sure. Absolutely. But when you take the responsibility for any miscommunications or for not getting the job done, then you're at least looking in the right spot. You got a chance to make it better. So I appreciate you being on the show. Again, Jorge Saunders, our bilingual Sandler trainer. He is currently in Miami, but is trained all around the world in Spanish for us. I appreciate you taking some time to talk it out with us. Until next time, you need to subscribe to the podcast. It says hola from the Philippines, and lots of Sandler clients around the world chiming in on this one. So a special international version. But if you want to reach out to any of our trainers, go to Sandler.com, find one in your country, find one in your language, and go out there and do what you need to succeed. Until next time, we'll see you later. Good selling, everybody.
Si inventan, no hay paraíso.